Okay, one of the things I like to do on the show, I have to say, is talk about things that are current, obviously, and are all around us, but nobody likes to talk about. Or alternatively, nobody likes to take a particular view because, well, they don't like to be regarded as not being in the in crowd or woke or whatever it might be. And one of those issues is that I want to talk about, particularly as we head into Christmas, and it's 2 weeks away today, is loneliness. New Zealand is, for all the fact that we call ourselves a gregarious and socially minded people, we have large numbers of people in this country who are lonely. Everybody, there's a bit of a, if you like, a perception that lonely people are generally old people, might have lost a partner, rattling around in the family home, relatives have fled overseas, and they are simply waiting for dementia and a whole series of other things to happen. But in actual fact, it's not true. Loneliness strikes all ages, and in fact, on the research that I've done at the moment, the people who are likely to be the loneliest people are teenagers and young adults, although obviously that cliche of the elderly person is obviously true as well. The British in 2018 appointed a member of parliament and a lawyer, Tracy Crouch. She made global headlines, it has to be said, when she was made the very first Minister of Loneliness. Now, remember, this was a Conservative government under Theresa May, as I remember, going back 6 years now. And then this would follow the publication of a report from the Joe Cox Commission on Loneliness that found in Britain more than 9 million people, or roughly 15% of the population, were in a frequent or perpetual state of loneliness, despite obviously being very heavily built up and urban areas. And you would imagine on the basis of New Zealand that was very similar as well. We're going to go and talk now on that particular issue with somebody who is a psychologist and a counsellor, and that is Cathy Comber. And she joins us now, who's made something of a feature of her research and her counselling in the area of loneliness. And she joins us now. Cathy, I can't see you, but that's that typical I'm lonely down here in Central Otago all by myself. But welcome to the show nonetheless.
Hello, Michael. Thank you for inviting me, and we can still have a meaningful conversation, which is the antidote to loneliness.
I'm talking to you now, that's right. My loneliness will be forestalled for at least the next 30 minutes. Listen, Cathy, tell me first of all a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Okay, so I'm not a psychologist, although I have I've done psychology papers and have had a very avid interest in relationships. But what I am qualified in is loneliness and counselling. So I actually did my master's thesis on loneliness, but I had an interest way before then on loneliness.
Why did you do your master's thesis on loneliness?
So around the time that you're talking about Theresa May's government, the government in the UK doing a Minister for Loneliness, we had recognised in New Zealand that something wasn't quite right about loneliness, but it really wasn't talked about at all, except for from a senior's perspective. So we did some research, and I'm saying we, that's my partner Spencer Schooler and I, we looked at what was happening in this government and what was happening overseas, and had a lot of talks with a lot of people in Stats New Zealand had done studies on loneliness, and they do capture some information about that. And that led us to develop Loneliness New Zealand, created as a charitable trust here in New Zealand. And we looked at three different parts. We look at the individual, and that's the part that led me to my thesis. And so I can talk probably much more, I talk very passionately on the individual and loneliness. We then also had this idea, so the reason I'm talking to you is about preventing loneliness, so helping educate people. And then we're also trying to do whatever we can do to influence at a government level, wherever we can give our input from a perspective of loneliness, we do. So
how do you define loneliness? Can you tell me?
Loneliness. Yeah, it's very different to depression and anxiety. Loneliness is really about how we perceive our relationships. And it could be one individual relationship that's core to you, or a lot of relationships. And it's the issue of loneliness comes where your social desire, your desires actually have a total mismatch with what's happening, for what you want and what you need. And loneliness, the key part here is loneliness, when it's mild, it can help facilitate us to go out and meet people. So like first day of school, new job, it helps you. So there's a good reason to have loneliness. But when it becomes painful and distressing, we talk about, prolonged or chronic, that starts affecting people's well-being. And that's the loneliness that I am, really talking about when I talk.
The New Zealand doctor reported last month, I think it was, that the impact of loneliness and social isolation on the health outcomes of older New Zealanders had reached epidemic levels, according to that study, which I'm sure you're aware of as well. When you say epidemic levels, what does that mean? Does that mean what, 1 in 4, 1 in 3, half? How many people? What percentages?
I think what we'll look at is let's not focus on the percentages at this stage. What I think we mean by epidemic is that you're quite right as you introduced the segment, was that it affects all people. It affects all countries. So that so it's not there. It's starting to affect the mental health and physical health of a lot of people. And so when it becomes, so again, I just want to reinforce, it's when it becomes chronic or very, it's prolonged. So when you start, you're not dealing with the loneliness in a healthy way. So the statistics on every country are slightly varied, but if I can give you some idea in New Zealand, when we talk about it from an age perspective, the young people, we're talking about, they feel experiencing loneliness most or all the time, about 6%, but some of the time 17%. So when you look at it as what we could consider potentially becoming prolonged to chronic, we're looking around 23%. And that is quite significant when you look at a number, take it from the numbers of people.
So you're saying that 1 in 4 young people have the potential to be chronically lonely?
Yes.
Right.
And that's not related, as you said, it's not related to who they're with. It's how they perceive their relationships and how well they're going. Can I just say, in New Zealand, when we think of the epidemic side, we don't really talk about, I know that Breaking Barriers study did use the word epidemic. It was put because the importance is to try and get government involvement. And government involvement, already started in the UK. And so the USA has got on board, making a lot of traction with that. And Australia has, and so New Zealand's behind. But can I just say, in New Zealand, what I really try hard to influence is that we don't only think of this as an age group thing. So it's easy to start swapping the plight of the seniors to go to the plight of the young people, when actually loneliness goes right across all ages.
There's a spectrum.
So so I like to think of it when we think about it in New Zealand as to where it starts affecting the mental health in quite a serious way, is when we start looking at different vulnerabilities together. So being young and having other vulnerabilities. So the top of the list.
What you mean, if I'm young and gay, for example?
Yes, and you hit a nail on the head, because they transgender, bisexual, LBG, we're talking about 14 to 40 and 42%. So 57% of transgender people have probably got quite serious loneliness.
Well, that's understandable, because people would regard them as a bit odd. So, and this is where I'm heading on this.
But they're real people with real feelings.
Oh, no, don't, no. But wait on.
Yes.
I understand what you're saying, But the causes of
Yes.
loneliness seem to me to be the issue here. I mean, listen,
Yes.
I know what the statistics say. I know what the numbers are saying. I think the US Surgeon General's now even described loneliness as a public health crisis in that particular country in the USA.
Well, that's what the epidemic is about. Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
To get government involvement on the.
That's right. And I think he or she used the connection of saying loneliness in terms of its effect upon mortality rates is like smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which is
Yes.
Yeah, that is quite serious at that point. And it obviously does. But I'm interested in the causes of loneliness because all I can say is as a kid, I was lonely. And as an adolescent as well. So I'm happy to share that with you. But if I was to look at the causes of loneliness, they are as much personal, it seems to me, as they are societal or communal. And what causes people to believe and in actual fact to be lonely.
Okay, so it varies, as you say, very individual. So let's put it at one perspective. One perspective is there could be something that as you're reaching sort of 60s or whatever, that you could just be going deaf and your hearing starts getting affected. And so that actually gets you less involved in conversations, you start withdrawing. So that could be a very specific reason that could be quite easily fixed with a hearing aid if you understood it to be your situation or your partner's situation, so it could be either. It could be something like social anxiety, could start off loneliness. The anxiety itself can develop loneliness, but often loneliness starts just at the feeling of being rejected. And the feeling of being rejected could come, which is where the transgender issues do have.
Oh, no, but I mean, you've used an extreme there. Can I just go back to normal people for a second? Sorry, please.
Yeah.
You've used the extremes of transgender. I'm just trying to deal with somebody who isn't transgender, male or female.
Okay, social anxiety is normal people.
Yeah, I mean, well, yes, but what I'm trying to suggest to you is that there are plenty of lonely people who aren't transgender. So in other words, there isn't a point that demarcates them. And I'm trying to utilize in our conversation just, if you like, normality in terms of male and females who have grown up in their youth and in their childhood and then in their young adulthood, and then obviously that's translated through into their lives, where that loneliness comes from. How do we grow up lonely as children and adolescents in New Zealand, even if we're not transgender?